She was 19 years old, and she had $11 to her name. The cold came through the soles of her shoes before it came through her jacket, a specific kind of cold that starts in the concrete and works upward through bone. She had been sleeping in the Greyhound station in Amarillo for 4 nights, rotating between the hard plastic seats and the single-occupancy bathroom, when the security guard's shift changed. 3 weeks earlier, her aunt had set a cardboard box on the porch in Lubbock containing everything Eleanor owned and locked the door from the inside without saying a word through the glass. For $10 and a signature on a county transfer document, Eleanor Vasquez bought a decommissioned Santa Fe Railway boxcar sitting on a dead spur line outside a town called Cuervo, New Mexico. Population 114, no grocery store, one working well. The boxcar had a collapsed interior wall on the north end, a floor soft with rot in 2 places, a sliding door that no longer slid, and a roof seam that had been weeping rust for what looked like a decade. But beneath the original oak floorboards, in a space that had not been opened since some time before Elena was born, something had been left behind, and what it was changed the entire direction of her life. If you've ever believed that the worst thing that happened to you might also have been the thing that aimed you, stay with this one. These stories matter because they travel. Drop your city in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're watching from. Her grandmother, Rosa, had worked concrete her entire adult life. Not decorative concrete, not poured patios or sidewalk panels. Structural concrete. The kind that holds bridges over rivers and keeps retaining walls from surrendering to hillsides. Rosa had come up in Laredo in the 1960s, working alongside her own father, who had learned the trade from a man who built irrigation infrastructure across the Texas-Chihuahua border. By the time Elena was old enough to follow Rosa to a job site, her grandmother's hands were maps, the knuckles enlarged, the palms calloused in specific patterns that corresponded to specific tools, the fingers permanently slightly curled from decades of handling screeds and floats and vibrators. Rosa could look at a poured slab and tell you its age within 5 years, its mixed design within a reasonable margin, and whether it had been finished by someone who understood the work or someone who was merely performing it. She started bringing Eleanor when Eleanor was 7, not to watch, to work. Small tasks first, fetching water, moving tools from the truck to the form site, holding a string-line taut while Rosa checked grade. By 9, Elena was mixing small batches by hand to Rosa's specification, the ratio by feel, the consistency by sound when the mix moved in the barrel. By 11, she could read the bleed water on a fresh pour and know when the surface was ready to finish. By 14, she understood formwork. How to build the wooden or metal boundaries that shape what concrete becomes, how to brace them against the hydrostatic pressure of fresh mix, how to account for the way concrete moves and settles before it decides to stay. Rosa taught the way people teach a native language, not through explanation, but through repetition and proximity. She would correct Eleanor's grip on a bull float without naming what was wrong, just repositioning her hands until the stroke was right. She would stop Eleanor mid-motion on a wall form and say, "Feel where the pressure is going," and wait until Eleanor could feel it. The knowledge accumulated in Eleanor's body before it accumulated in her mind. By the time she was 16, she could look at a wall and understand, without thinking, how it had been built, what had been done right, what had been done carelessly, and what would eventually fail. Rosa was diagnosed with a fast-moving cancer in Elena's junior year of high school. The diagnosis came in October. She was gone by February. She was 61 years old. Pancreatic, which is the one that moves like a river running downhill. You hear about it, and then suddenly it's over. Eleanor did not cry at the funeral. She had cried the night Rosa told her, alone in the bathroom of Rosa's house on Crockett Street, with the water running so no one would hear. After that, she had nothing left of that particular kind of grief. What remained was the practical kind. Rosa had owned the house on Crockett Street, in her name only, and the estate went sideways almost immediately because Rosa had a son, Eleanor's Uncle Daniel, who had been estranged for years but who appeared within 3 weeks of the burial with documentation and a lawyer and a position that was legally sound and personally devastating. Eleanor's aunt, Daniel's wife Connie, was not cruel. That is the thing Eleanor would have to spend years understanding. Connie was frightened of debt, frightened of what Rose's illness had cost, frightened of a 19-year-old girl who was not her daughter and who represented an obligation she had never agreed to carry. The box on the porch was Connie's fear made physical. Eleanor understood it. Understanding it didn't make it easier to pick up and carry to the station. She had $42 when she left Lubbock. By the time she had bought 4 bus tickets, Lubbock to Amarillo, and then 3 days of waiting and rerouting, she had 17. The Greyhound station had a vending machine and a water fountain, and she made this work for 4 days. On the 5th day, she had $11 left, and a growing understanding that Amarillo was not going to change. The man who told her about Cuervo was named Pete Archuleta. He was sweeping the station floor at 5 a.m, when Elena was the only person in the building. He swept in methodical rows, the way people do when they have been doing the same task long enough that they stop thinking about it, and just do it well. He asked her where she was headed. She told him she didn't know yet. He thought about that for a moment, and then told her that there was a county in New Mexico that had been quietly listing old railroad infrastructure for nominal amounts because the maintenance liability was worse than the tax revenue, and that he had heard from his cousin, who worked county records, that there was a boxcar on a dead spur outside a small town that had been on the list for 2 years with no takers. He said he didn't know what she would do with it, but that it was land adjacent, and there were stranger beginnings than that. He wrote the county website URL on the back of a station receipt. He went back to sweeping. She used the station's public computer terminal. The listing was still there. The county assessor's price was $10. The adjacent land parcel, a 30-foot easement on either side of the dead spur, transferred with it. She read the listing 3 times. Then she bought a bus ticket to Santa Rosa, New Mexico, which was the closest stop, and she still had $1 left. The county assessor's office for Guadalupe County was in Santa Rosa, which was itself a small city but felt large after 4 days in a bus station. The assessor who handled the transfer was a woman named Berta Montoya. She had been working in that office for 26 years, which you could tell not from any plaque on the wall, but from the way she moved through the filing system. The particular efficiency of someone who knows exactly where everything is and has never needed to look. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a coffee mug that had been refilled so many times the ceramic on the handle had worn smooth on the grip side. Berta looked at Elena across the counter for a long moment before she looked at the form. "You have somewhere to stay while you work on it?" she asked. It wasn't an aggressive question. It was the question of someone who had seen people make this mistake before and was giving Eleanor a chance to demonstrate she wasn't making it. "I'll be on site," Eleanor said. "I can make the structure weather-tight in the first week. I know concrete work, the foundation situation. I can read when I get there." Berta looked at her for another moment. "That property hasn't had a structure inspection since 2009, she said. "The last person who filed an intent to develop on it was a man from Albuquerque who drove out once, took photographs, and never filed the secondary paperwork. What happened to him?" "He saw it in person," Berta said, which was the closest thing to a warning Elena was going to get. The paperwork took 40 minutes. There were 3 forms, a transfer document, a county acknowledgement of the easement terms, and a liability waiver that was 2 pages long and very, very specific about flooding, structural failure, and railway infrastructure. Eleanor read all of it. Berta stamped the transfer document and slid it across the counter, with a key attached to a wire loop. The key was old. Genuinely old, the kind of heavy brass that has density to it, the kind that has been sitting somewhere for long enough that the teeth have developed a faint green at the base where they meet the bow. It was heavier than Elena expected. She closed her hand around it, and it sat in her palm like something that had been waiting to be held. "That key," Berta said, "is for the interior lockbox, not the door. The sliding door hasn't locked in 30 years. Someone welded the latch mechanism shut sometime in the 90s, we think. County inspector noted it, but no one was ever sure why." She paused. The property has a spring about 60 yards east of the car through the scrub. It was running clean as of 2019 when we had a field survey out that way. I'd verify it when you arrive. Elena thanked her. She was at the door when Berta said, "The land out there is hard." A pause. "But it holds." The bus from Santa Rosa to Cuervo ran twice a week. A man named Hector, who drove a propane delivery route, dropped her the remaining 4 miles for no reason, except that it was on his way and she was standing on the roadside with a pack and there was no shade for a long distance in any direction. She saw the Boxcar from a quarter-mile out. The spur line ran along a low ridge, and the car sat at the end of it like a period at the end of a sentence. A long, low, rust-orange shape against the pale scrub and the pale sky. The New Mexico high desert in March has a particular light, flat and bright and without the warmth the word desert implies, a light that shows everything at full resolution and softens nothing. The car looked exactly as hard as it was in that light. The roofline dipped slightly on the east end. The sliding door was on the south face and was visibly warped, gapped at the top of its track. Rust had moved across the steel exterior in tide patterns, dark brown over the original orange, and the lower 6 inches of the car body were the colour of old blood, where moisture had worked at the base. She stood at a distance and looked at it for a long time. This is something Rosa had taught her without ever naming it as a lesson. Before you touch a structure, look at it. Learn its posture. A structure that has been standing for a long time will tell you what it has been doing, where it has been moving, where it has been still, where it has been fighting the elements, and where it has been losing. She walked to the perimeter before she tried the door. The steel undercarriage was surprisingly intact. The truck assemblies were seized and would need attention eventually, but the structural steel beneath the car body showed no critical fractures. The concrete tie blocks the spur rested on were cracked in several places, but had not shifted dramatically. The car had settled into this landscape, not collapsed into it. When she pulled the warped door, it required her whole body, feet braced against the tie block below, both hands on the latch bar. The smell arrived before anything else. Old oak, which has a particular dusty sweetness, diesel absorbed into wood over decades, a metallic undertone that was the steel walls releasing the memory of heat, and something else underneath all of it. Old paper, or old cloth, or both. The smell of things that had been enclosed for a long time with no air to move them along. The interior was dim, the light coming in from the gap at the door, and 2 small high windows on the north wall, both glazed with decades of dust. The floor was original oak plank, wide boards, tongue and groove, the kind of flooring that was laid to last. In the centre section it was still firm. Near the north wall, where the structural member had cracked and pulled the south face of the car slightly out of square, 2 boards had gone soft with water intrusion. At the far east end there was a wooden partition wall that created a small separate space, a watchman's room or a records room. Whoever had used this car had needed somewhere private. Inside the partition room, a wooden desk folded flat against the wall, iron hinged, a stool with a broken leg, leaning, a kerosene lantern, empty and intact, a metal shelf with 3 ceramic insulators on it, the kind used for telegraph or telephone line work. She was examining the ceramic insulators, trying to understand what the car had been used for, whether it had been a mobile field office of some kind, when she noticed the floor. It was the grain that told her. Oak plank flooring has a grain, and the grain follows the wood continuously from board to board in the way a river follows itself. In the northeast corner of the partition room, beneath the metal shelf, there was a section of planking approximately 3 feet square where the grain broke. It broke cleanly in a straight line on all 4 sides. This was not how oak flooring fails or shifts or ages. This was a cut. Someone had cut a section of the floor and relaid it, and they had been skilled enough that the cut was almost invisible, but not quite, not to someone who had spent 12 years learning to look at how things are made. She pressed on the section. It moved. Barely. A fraction of a millimetre, but it moved, which a continuous plank floor does not do. She found the tool she needed in the car's exterior utility box, a wrecking bar, short-handled, left behind with a few other items. She worked the tip into the seam on the north edge of the cut section. The resistance was significant, decades of compression and possibly some kind of sealant applied deliberately at the seams. She worked slowly, methodically, adding leverage in increments, redistributing the pressure so the boards above wouldn't split. It took 40 minutes. When the section finally gave, it gave all at once, a sound like a long exhalation, a deep, woody creak, and then a release. And the 3-foot square lifted as a single unit, hinged on the south side where she hadn't yet inserted the bar, a hidden door. A proper one, with a piano hinge along the south edge that had been installed with real craft, and a recessed iron handle on the interior face that you would only find if you already knew it was there. Beneath it, a space approximately 18 inches deep, running 4 feet in both directions, lined in cedar. The cedar had kept it. The cedar had kept everything. She lowered herself to her knees and looked. The first things she saw were the documents, a metal deed box, the kind with a clasp lock, sitting on top of a stack of ledger books. The ledger books were wrapped in oilskin and tied with waxed linen cord. Beside them, a roll of maps or drawings in a tin tube, sealed. She opened the deed box first with the key from her pocket, the heavy brass key that Berta had handed her across the counter, and it fit. It turned. The lid lifted on oiled hinges that were not original to the box, that had been replaced at some point by someone who intended this box to remain functional for a long time. Inside the deed box, a layered stack of envelopes, each labelled in a careful hand. Beneath the envelopes, bundled with a rubber band that had dried and cracked but held its shape, money, not modern bills. Series 1934 Federal Reserve notes, the large format kind, in denominations of $50 and $100. Money orders from the mid-1940s, issued by the Railway Express Agency in amounts between $20 and $75 each. And, at the bottom of the stack, wrapped in a square of chamois leather, 14 St. Gordon's double eagle gold coins, each in its own paper sleeve. She knew what they were because Rosa had kept one in a cigar box, not for any financial reason, but because her own grandfather had given it to her, and she had wanted Elena to know what real gold felt like in the hand. Heavy, in a way that is different from any other weight. Warm, despite the temperature of the space it had come from. She sat back on her heels and made herself breathe slowly. She counted the bills, the money orders, the coins. She counted again. The total in 1940s face value was somewhere near $4,000 in paper currency and money orders. The coins were different. Even at melt value, 14 double eagles were something else entirely. She set the coins aside and reached back into the space. A canvas satchel, old and stiff but intact. Inside it, a pocket watch on a chain, the case engraved on the back with 2 initials and a date, CLM 1921. A folded photograph, black and white, of a man standing in front of this boxcar when it was new, when the paint was fresh and the sliding door was square in its tracks and the man was smiling, one hand on the door latch, the other in his pocket, and an envelope, separate from the others, sealed with wax, with 2 words on the front in the same careful hand, for whoever. She opened it. My name is Clement Lewis Marchetti. I worked this car as a mobile relay station for the Western Union Telegraph Company for 22 years, from 1931 to 1953, when they decommissioned the spur and gave me 30 days to clear the equipment. I am writing this on the last day I will be in this car. What the work meant, I cannot say in the way people usually say such things. What I can say is that every message I handled passed through my hands, and I handled all of them the same way, regardless of what they said. A death, a marriage, a business matter, a love letter, a soldier's discharge. I sent them all clean and accurate and fast. That is what the work asked. I gave it that. I saved the money over 22 years. I had no wife and no children, and my needs were simple, and this landscape does not ask much of you financially. if you are willing to ask little of it in return. I am leaving the money here rather than taking it because I'm going somewhere I don't know the costs of yet, and because I believe the car deserves to go on, being something rather than stopping when I stop. I cannot give it to the company. They no longer want it. I cannot give it to a person I know. Everyone I know is old now too. So I give it to the future, which has always been more generous with me than the past. The spring 60 yards east through the scrub runs clean and cold and has never gone dry in the 22 years I have known it. The east wall has a gap at the baseboard, third section from the partition room where the mice have been coming in. Plug it with steel wool and they will find somewhere else to be. Whoever finds this, you found it because you paid attention or because you knew how to look at a flaw. Either way, you are the right person. This car has been waiting for someone who would understand what it is. Take care of it. Let it take care of you. Clement Lewis Marchetti, March 7th, 1953. She read it twice, sat in the cedar-scented dark of the hidden space with the letter in both hands. When she finally spoke, she spoke to the room and to the man in the photograph and to Rosa, who she knew was not there but who she addressed anyway, because some conversations you have to finish regardless. I found it, she said. I've got it from here. If you're still here, thank you for sitting with this one. I want to ask you something the story just made me think about. Has there ever been a moment in your life when something that felt like an ending turned out to be the specific door that opened everything? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. The coins were the question she handled first. She drove with a man named Torres who ran a parts resupply to Santa Rosa twice a week and was willing to take a passenger for the cost of the gas money. In Santa Rosa, she found a bank, and in the bank she found a manager who was professionally careful and personally curious, and who spent 40 minutes on the phone with a numismatist in Albuquerque while Elena sat in a chair and drank water from a paper cup. The verdict on the St. Gaudens coins was significant. They were genuine. They were in condition that collectors described with a specific vocabulary Elena wrote down, MS62 to MS64, which meant they had been carefully kept and had not circulated. The numismatist drove from Albuquerque the next day. She sold 12 of the coins and kept 2, one because it was dated 1921, the same year as the engraving on the pocket watch, and one because she wanted to have something to show people when she needed to explain what patients looked like in physical form. The paper currency and money orders she took to a currency specialist the numismatist recommended. Some of the bills had collector value above face value. She was careful and slow, and she asked questions, and she did not accept the first offer on anything. She opened an account. She had enough to do the work. The restoration took 11 months. She started with the roof. The east end seam was the critical failure, and she addressed it with a self-adhering, modified bitumen membrane that she sourced from a roofing supply in Vaughan and applied herself in 3 days of careful work. Rosa had never worked roofing, but the principles of waterproofing were continuous with everything Eleanor understood about protecting structures from water, and she applied them with the same patience Rosa had taught her to apply to a concrete finish. Never rush a material past what it is able to do in the conditions you have. The floor she repaired board by board. The soft sections near the north wall she removed and replaced with reclaimed oak she found in a salvage yard in Albuquerque. Not a perfect match, but close enough that only someone who already knew where to look would see the difference. The hidden door she preserved, rehinging it with new hardware and relaying the section so it sat flush and true. She kept the cedar lining intact. The north wall structural member was the largest single challenge. She needed to set a proper bearing point, and she needed concrete for it. A small footing, precisely placed to transfer the load from the wall to a proper base. She had to relearn certain things in miniature. The same principles she knew from large pours applied to a pour that could be measured in cubic feet rather than cubic yards. She got it wrong once. She poured again. The second time she got it right, which was exactly the ratio Rosa had always said to accept. Once wrong, once right, and then you know it. A man named Sid Tafoya appeared in the 4th week. He was 70 years old and walked with a cane, and he came across the scrub from the direction of the road without announcing himself. He carried a mason jar of pickled chilies and set it on the exterior utility box without asking permission to be on the property. "Clement used to let me come here when I was a boy," he said. He was looking at the car, not at her. "He taught me the Morse alphabet on a practice key. I never got fast enough to use it professionally, but I still know it." He paused. "You've done the roof already?" 3 weeks ago. He was always worried about that east seam." He looked at it for another moment. "You got it." He didn't say anything else for a while, then he said, "He was a solitary man, not a lonely one. There's a difference." He looked at her for the first time. "You seem like you understand that distinction." He came back 6 more times over the course of the renovation, usually bringing something. A jar of something preserved, once a box of cedar shims that were exactly what she needed for the interior partition wall, once simply himself and his cane, and his willingness to sit on the utility box and watch her work without needing to comment on it. He had known Clement for decades. He was the closest thing to a witness the story had, and he bore that function with the quiet dignity of someone who understood what he was there for. 3 others came. A woman named Gilda Sanchez, who was the postmaster in Cuervo, and who brought an armload of historical county maps because she had heard Eleanor was restoring the car and thought the maps belonged somewhere that would keep them. A man named Roy Archuleta, Pete's cousin, the one who had first known about the listing, who came with a truckload of properly graded gravel to address the drainage issue on the north side that Elena had been solving with temporary measures. A woman named Dolores Benitez, who was 91 years old and had been born 3 miles from this spur line, and who sat in a folding chair Eleanor set up for her and said, at the end of her visit, looking at the restored exterior with its fresh red oxide primer, "It looks like itself again." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. In September, clearing scrub from the east side of the spur, Eleanor found the spring exactly where Clement had said it would be. Cold water, clean, coming up through pale sand into a stone-lined channel that had been set by hand. The stones fitted without mortar in the old way, each one chosen for its shape. She tasted it. She sat beside it for a long time. The man had known this land for 22 years. He had told the truth about every single thing. The light was leaving the sky from the west when she sat on the exterior utility box at the end of the final day. She had been inside all afternoon laying the last of the interior finish work, a lime wash on the steel walls that softened the cold of the metal and gave the space a warmth that surprised her every time she walked in. The sky over the high desert was doing what it does in October, pulling the colour out of everything slowly, leaving a long blue-grey twilight that had no urgency to it, that simply persisted until it didn't. She thought about Clement Marchetti. She thought about him on his last day in this car, sitting where she was sitting, or standing in the doorway, looking at the same ridge she was looking at. He had sent messages for 22 years, other people's words passing through his hands, going somewhere. He had never claimed the words as his own. He had simply sent them clean and accurate and fast, and then he had sealed up everything he had saved and left it in the floor and gone away. And she had this sense since the day she read the letter, that the leaving had cost him something real, that this place had been as close to home as he had ever gotten, and that he had understood, in the clear-eyed way of solitary people who have had a long time to think, that a place that was yours should eventually be someone else's too, that holding on past your time was a form of waste. She thought about Rosa. Not the dying part, she had thought about that enough, but the specific morning in Elena's 9th summer when Rosa had handed her a wooden float and positioned her hands on the handle and said, "Listen to what the surface is telling you." She had meant it literally. A concrete surface finishing well makes a particular sound under the float, a slight whisper that changes tone as the moisture leaves. Eleanor had learned to hear it. That particular form of attention, listening to what a surface is telling you, was not just a concrete skill. It was the habit of mind that had let her read the floor in the partition room, the grain breaking, the barely perceptible give, the thing that looked continuous but wasn't. Rosa had given her the ears to hear that. And she was standing here, 11 months into rebuilding something because of what Rosa's hands had taught hers. She thought about Connie, not with anger. She had moved through the anger in the Amarillo station, in increments over 4 days of hard plastic seats and vending machine crackers. She thought about her with something more complicated, a recognition that Connie's fear had been the force that moved her, and that forces that move you are not always the forces that love you, and that these two things can be true simultaneously without cancelling each other out. She would not have come to Cuervo. She would not have had $11 and a need for something that cost 10. She would not have been in the Amarillo station at 5 a.m. when Pete Archuleta was sweeping in the particular methodical way of someone doing a job well. The door that closes you out is sometimes the door that opens you up. This is not a comforting thought, and it is not meant to be. It is just what she had found to be true. She wanted to say something to whoever might be listening, not the empty scrub, not the fading sky, but you, wherever you are, watching this in whatever light you have. There is a version of this story that is about money found in a floor. That is not the story. The story is about what it costs to pay attention, really pay attention to how things are made, to what surfaces are telling you, to an old man's careful hand writing 2 words on the outside of an envelope meant for no one he would ever know. The story is about the inheritance you carry that you don't know you're carrying until the moment you need it. Every person who ends up alone and without resources, in a place they've never been, is carrying something that got them there. Some knowledge, some habit of mind, some form of attention that was given to them by someone who is gone. The question is whether the worst moment arrives early enough to let you use it. Outside Cuervo, New Mexico, on a dead spur in the October dusk, there was a boxcar with new mortar in its footings, cedar-lined walls, a spring 60 yards east that ran cold and clean, and a woman who had arrived with $11 and was now watching the last of the light leave the ridge. She was 19 when she got here. She would not be 19 much longer. What she carried was not money, though the money had made the work possible. What she carried was a grandmother's hands reproduced in hers, the specific weight of a float, the sound of a surface ready to finish, the patience to look at a thing until it tells you what it is. That is what got left for her, not in a cedar-lined space beneath a floor, but in the particular way her fingers close around a tool. She was 19 years old, and she had $11, and she bought a decommissioned railway boxcar for $10 in a town most people have never heard of and would never go. It was the best $10 she ever spent. If you know someone who's in the worst chapter right now, who's standing outside a locked door holding a box of everything they own, send them this story, not because it has a happy ending, because it has an honest one. And I want to ask you, is there something you learned from someone you've lost that you didn't realize you still knew until the moment you needed it most? Tell me below. More stories are waiting. We'll be back soon.